Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the New Jersey Studies Academic Alliance meeting. This is one of our just one of our meetings where we have a talk, which Melissa will introduce in a moment. I'm Michelle Rotunda. I'm the acting chair of the of NJSAA. I just want to, at the beginning, and I'll probably remind you at the end as well, our next two meetings we have coming up on April 2nd. It will be a business meeting at 3, followed by our undergraduate award presentations, which are always really interesting. And then on May 22nd, we have an in-person meeting, which we haven't had in years. So we're very excited. That's going to be at Monmouth University. And there's going to be a talk on the Center for American Music and some of that history, and a tour of the Bruce Springsteen archives as well for those who are interested. And that will be at 3 o'clock on May 22nd. And Melissa just put the link in the chat as well, so you can check that out. And so now I will turn it over to Melissa Ziobro to introduce our speaker for today.
All right. Hello, everybody. Today's speaker is Jordan Howell. Jordan is Associate Professor of Sustainable Business at Rowan University and the Director of the Rowan Center for Responsible Leadership. Jordan's research, teaching, and professional practice are all focused on sustainable business. Now, you're all here, so I'm sure you read the event announcement, but we are here to discuss Jordan's 2023 book, Garbage in the Garden State. Just a little snippet from the book's website. New Jersey faces endless solid waste stereotypes. Many in the rest of the United States would have you believe that Jersey's main value is as a dumping site for New York, Philadelphia, and shore tourists. As if. I don't even like reading that, but I digress. This project, building on a broad base of unexamined archival sources and extensive interviews with key figures in waste management during the past 50 years, reveals a more profound truth. New Jersey's towns, counties, courts, and companies have been shaping waste management processes across the United States for decades. So I'm going to first turn it over to Jordan, who will give us kind of an overview of the book and his writing process. Then I will ask Jordan a few questions. Then you'll all have a chance to ask some questions. So Jordan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks so much for inviting me to talk about garbage in my book, which hopefully is not considered garbage, but you know, if it is, that's okay. From whence it came, I guess. So, yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm in the College of Business at Rowan University, where I teach sustainability classes, mostly to MBA students, but also to some undergrads, you know, upper level undergrads. And yeah, you know, my research is focused on waste and recycling for maybe the last, oh boy, it's been 14 years, hasn't it? Yeah, since I started working on this topic, not only in New Jersey, but some other places too. Previously, I did research on waste management in Hawaii, which of course necessitated going to Hawaii and spending some time there. And then also in Maine and in Michigan, where I used to live, and where I got my PhD at Michigan State. So yeah, there's been a lot of garbage for a long time. It's really interesting to think about New Jersey. I didn't know a lot about you know, the kind of waste management system in New Jersey until I started this project. You know, I'm not from here. I didn't grow up with it, but in, like, you know, looking at kind of extensions of the work that I was doing before, you know, a natural kind of place to go is like, well, what do they do in this place that I live in now? And, you know, very, very quickly, it turns out, you know, that New Jersey has been really very innovative on the winning and losing side of a number of very critical lawsuits, as it turns out, about like kind of the role of waste management in the broader economy, and very innovative attempts at some kind of policy things around waste management. You know, I should be clear that the state has not really been an innovator as far as like technology or engineering around waste, and that's okay. They don't have to be. You know, it's really been more on the kind of regulatory, policy, legal kind of management side of waste management. But I would argue, maybe just given my role, my professional role now, that stuff is probably a lot more important than the engineering. Once you get the engineering right, you just keep doing it over and over. It's the other stuff that changes around it. So yeah, so the book, I started working on it in maybe 2017 as far as research, and it really was a very interesting research process. Spent a lot of time in the kind of gray literature, and I see John is joined us today. I was fortunate to talk with John Beekman earlier a couple weeks ago about the role of kind of so-called gray literature in academic research. So things like testimony from congressional hearings, or things that are not quite publications in the news media or published by an established publisher. They're really a very vital source for this project. And they were also kind of complemented by a lot of interviews with people who are currently or formerly in the waste management and recycling industries. As an industry, waste management has been around forever. It's one of our oldest kind of human activities, figuring out what do we do with the things we don't want anymore. But as like kind of an organized business, it's much more recent than that. It's really only a 20th century innovation. And even then it was still pretty disorganized. So it's really only since the early 1960s or late 1950s that waste management became like kind of a government problem, if you want to use that term, in the sense that it was recognized as something that needs to have kind of legal oversight for economic and environmental reasons. A lot of concern about waste and recycling arose alongside other types of environmental awareness, starting in the 1950s and 1960s. Recycling as a practice, grew directly out of the environmental movement, I think we could say. And you see that unfolding in New Jersey as well. So, just sort of the broad contours of New Jersey's waste journey. Excuse me, there's a little friend in my office here flying around in front of my face. It went from basically put the trash wherever you can, and for a long time that meant the meadowlands or any other sort of swamp in the state, and anything that didn't seem to have economic value. You all know that New Jersey is a place with 650 different towns and cities. At one point in New Jersey history, there were almost 700 individual dumps. So each town had its own, and some had a few. And these were really like kind of places where you just would informally take your trash, or maybe your town collected something and they would dump it there on your behalf. Folks realize that is not the best practice for lots of reasons related to public health, for environmental protection. And so starting in the 1950s, the state decided to step in and say, we should really try to organize this in a way where we're not contributing to these problems with vermin or with nuisance odors. Fires are a problem at dumps, and making the best use of land in this, increasingly crowded state that we live in. So that's really the origin of the story is how can we deal with this garbage in an organized way? If you read the book, you'll see that the state of New Jersey tried to have a really kind of centralized planning process for garbage, in that the State Department of Environmental Protection wanted every county to submit a plan as to here's what we're going to do with garbage in our county, here's where we're going to dispose of it, here's where we're going to collect it. It had to be approved by the state. There had to be plans in place to build a landfill or an incinerator. At least that's what the state wanted. Not everyone went along with that. And the state also tried to introduce mechanisms that would say where garbage could go. So if it's collected in Camden County, it has to go to this facility. If it's collected in, Hunterdon County, it has to go to this facility. And that was okay for a while, until it wasn't okay anymore by way of a number of lawsuits. The other thing that I think is really interesting, generally speaking, and maybe you have questions about this, people typically do, was about recycling in New Jersey. We were the first state to have a mandatory recycling law, which it maybe sounds more impressive than it actually is, given how it's been enforced. But businesses in New Jersey are required to offer recycling. Institutions in New Jersey are required to offer recycling. Now, I can look around my own university and find plenty of places where there is no recycling available, and you can probably think of different businesses that you've been to where you've never seen a recycling bin, even though it's a requirement. We can probably find, towns where recycling service is not so great, but it was the first state to have a mandatory recycling law. And, that's one of the many innovations that New Jersey had. What's interesting to me and sort of where the research has gone after this book has been figuring out why the recycling system is so kind of mediocre. And that's not a knock on New Jersey. It's mediocre everywhere in the US. So we have to understand that. But, some of the problem is owing to the fact that, we see recycling initially as this environmentally oriented solution, that we're doing something to conserve resources and, protect the earth. That's true to an extent. In the history of a place like New Jersey, recycling sort of emerged as a way to extend the life of other disposal facilities. So we have so little space to actually put like a new landfill in New Jersey. Okay, so what do? Well, let's extend the life of the landfills that we have by pulling all this stuff out of it through this very intensive recycling process. That's good as far as extending the life of landfills, but you haven't really fixed some of the underlying problems with recycling as far as, the economics of recycling, which have been challenging the entire time that we've been recycling in the state. And, back to the earlier point about the sources that were used in the book, it's really interesting for someone to read in 2023, 2024, that basically we have no idea what to do with plastics now, once we take them out of the waste stream. They didn't know what to do with them in 1985 either. So that's not new. It's always been this thing of like, well, markets will develop, they will emerge. Don't worry. They haven't emerged yet. It's been 40 years of waiting for the recycling Godot to appear. And here we are with, still recycling, but to what efficacy, I guess, is a question that I always have. So some of my research since the book has focused on that problem of improving markets for recycled material. What could you do from like a finance and economics perspective to improve how these things operate with an eye towards, more positive environmental outcomes and more positive financial and economic outcomes too. So that's kind of where we're at with the book. There's a lot in there. There's a lot of testimony from different congressional hearings and court cases. I really enjoyed reading those things. Hopefully people who pick up the book will too. Some of the folks were not necessarily around to be interviewed, but their words and ideas kind of lived on in the hearing or testimony that they gave many years ago about some of the waste industry's problems. So I tried to include, extended quotes from different hearings and stuff like that, so we can really get a sense of what people were thinking when they were trying to solve some of these problems. My editors didn't always like that, but whatever, here we are. So I really hate giving like a Zoom lecture, so I don't have any slides or anything like that. I was hoping, I like answering questions about the book or about like garbage in general, and then seeing how it connects back to New Jersey. So I'll turn it back over to you, Melissa, if you have questions or if the audience has questions that.
Yeah, absolutely. I am ready to get us started with the questions. I'll warm us up and then the audience can dive in. Thank you so much for sharing a bit about this truly interdisciplinary work. I have so many questions. Initially, I was going to ask what your motivations for writing the book were, but you've been working on waste management across the country, for some time now. So let me pivot then and ask you how we compare to your analysis of waste management in places like Hawaii, Maine, Michigan, etc. John Beekman just said dive in may not be the best metaphor for this topic. Fair point. Yeah. Fair point, John. Yeah. But tell us how we compare to these other states that you've assessed.
New Jersey is interesting because it's really densely populated, as you know, and it's also pretty small. It's like the fourth or fifth smallest state. And so we have a lot of people crammed into a small space. We have to give them somewhere to live. We have to have places where businesses operate. We would like to preserve green space and parks and things like that. At the same time, one thing that I think is pretty interesting about New Jersey's waste journey, at least historically, is that there was sort of a stated position among like state regulators and even going up to like the governor's office at one point in time that like we should be responsible for our own garbage. We produce the waste in New Jersey. We should find somewhere to throw it out in New Jersey. So for a long time, there was kind of this idea that like, yes, you could send it to other states, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, where they have more land. There's more landfills. Putting stuff in landfills is much cheaper in those places than it is in New Jersey. But there's almost like this environmental ethics question about whether or not, it's the right thing to do to dispose of our garbage elsewhere. And some of that, is maybe a little bit kind of high-minded, and that's great. Some of it is really practical. New Jersey, the state sued both the city of Philadelphia and different corners of New York over whether or not they're allowed to dispose of their garbage in New Jersey. So for a long time, most of the garbage coming out of New York City was going to the Meadowlands, famously depicted in The Great Gatsby, even the Valley of the Ashes and things like that. The city of Philadelphia was sending its waste to landfills in Gloucester, Camden, and Burlington County. And, when the state was in the process of closing down these, local town dumps, it was trying to regulate how much stuff was coming in from elsewhere into the new landfills that it was building. Ultimately, it lost those court cases at the state Supreme Court level and then the U.S. Supreme Court. And the argument was basically like, well, today, New Jersey doesn't need to send its garbage elsewhere, but these other places do. Tomorrow, New Jersey might need to send its garbage elsewhere. And if we sort of create a situation where everyone can reject garbage coming from somewhere else, that would be bad for public health reasons and also just for the practicality of having to dispose of garbage. So there was that kind of interesting ethos early on of like, well, we made this problem, we should fix it. And I think you still see that a little bit. In other ways, New Jersey is I don't know, pretty typical as far as garbage. If you look at the state's figures about recycling, we recycle a lot according to the state. I'm not saying their numbers are inaccurate, but some of the things that they count as recycling are maybe different than what other states do. And that's something you see across the US. We consider some materials recyclable here in New Jersey that other states would never, consider recyclable. And that's not just like a casual thing. Like some of the stuff is codified into law. Like there's a list of like 37 or so materials which are officially considered recyclable in New Jersey. Some of them are like concrete and steel. Well, those are very heavy, so they kind of juice the numbers when you're talking about recycling. Other states wouldn't call those things recyclable. So we make an attempt to recycle a lot of stuff in New Jersey, which is good. Not unlike other states, there was a strong interest in incinerators. So there's a type of incinerator that burns garbage and also generates electricity from that process, from that combustion. For some reason, incineration in the US is highly controversial. Other countries, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Japan, the UK, have embraced incineration without really a second thought. Just from a practicality point of not having space for landfills or whatever. So we may as well burn the stuff and generate electricity from it. In the US, we've decided that incineration is terrible in most instances. And some of it is because it's far cheaper to landfill. But we have a handful of incinerators still in New Jersey. At one point, the state's plan was that every county would have its own incinerator, but that fell apart for a number of reasons, some of due to cost and other concerns. But there's still like 5, which is more than most US states, which have 0. So we burn more than other places. We try to recycle a lot. We have a diminishing number of landfills in New Jersey, and the ones that we have are sort of on extended life support. Depending on where you are and how you get to work, you might drive by the Middlesex County landfill all the time. It's one of the tallest structures, man-made structures in the state. If you measure it from its base to its current height, the permit that leaves it open has been extended, 4 or 5 times, just because there's such concern of where would we send this stuff if we couldn't send it to the Middlesex County landfill. So there's that. There's also been some interesting innovation as a result. Like Some of the bigger recycling companies are in northern New Jersey. There was a lot of recycled paper processing for a long time in New Jersey. So there's some innovation happening too. I would say that that's probably the best comparative case that I can give you for how we stack up, I guess.
Thank you. So, two more questions, and then I'll turn it over to the audience if they want to jump in. Do you think that things like bans or limits on plastic straws, plastic bags, that those are helping here in the Garden State?
I don't know. The straw thing, I say this as a lifelong environmentalist. The straw thing seems really stupid to me. It always has. Like, I feel awful for that turtle that ate the straw and the other sea creatures. That's genuinely sad that happens to aquatic life. If you study ocean plastic, most of it is not coming from the US. It's coming from like 8 of 10 rivers around the world. 8 of those 10 are in, East Asia and Southeast Asia. So a lot of the ocean plastic is not a US problem, strictly speaking. We may have generated the plastic or, have the demand for plastic, but the turtle did not eat a straw that was coming from, your or my cup, that somehow made its way into the ocean. So I think the straw thing in particular was like a way of elected officials to look like they're taking action on an environmental issue with something that really is of little consequence. And that's actually the story sometimes with recycling in general, is that people like to participate in recycling. People feel good that they're making a positive environmental action when they recycle at their home or work. And you are to some extent. And it's really valuable to keep people, engaged with environmental issues. And if you do that through recycling, okay, cool. As far as the actual environmental impacts, they're kind of negligible in a lot of instances. So the value is in almost like the environmental education or like the ability to keep people engaged rather than the actual impacts of the practice itself. Plastic bags is really interesting. I don't know, if we can know, what are the positive environmental impacts of banning plastic bags? Like, certainly there's a litter impact that's positive. You have less bags blowing around or like piling up against fences. That's gross. We would want to eliminate those things. Clogging wastewater treatment plants, like that's a real issue. Like it's good for those reasons that bag use has been eliminated. At the same time, plastic bags, most people are not just carrying their groceries, or at least most people I know, maybe it's different for everyone. Most people are not carrying in their stuff from a plastic bag and then like putting that particular bag in the trash or like lighting it on fire in their backyard. You find some other use for your plastic bag, like, it's a trash bag in your house, or, you put your shoes in it to keep them separate from the rest of your clothes when you're traveling, or whatever the case might be. Plastic bags have a long life, and that's part of the problem environmentally, but they're also sort of durable. Like if you use them a bunch of times, maybe it's not so bad. So I'm not sure. I think this is another instance of like making a splashy environmental, decision because it attracts attention or it has the appearance of like, a commitment to green issues, when in reality, maybe that wasn't the problem to expend the time and political capital on. I don't know. Some things that seem like they could have been a higher priority, and I know New Jersey's been working on this, are like, what is the plastic that goes into the single-use food containers? For instance, that's like an ongoing issue, like takeout containers. They used to be styrofoam by and large. Well, styrofoam is pretty universally bad for the environment. You can't really reuse it. It kind of breaks down, if you try to, clean it or microwave it. God help you if you microwave it, that sort of stuff. Maybe you can improve the type of plastic that's going into, takeout containers, or maybe like some other places have done, engineer like, returnable takeout containers. Some cities are experimenting with that, where all the takeout places use the same containers, and they get collected by some service and they're cleaned and they get returned to businesses. Like that's a much more innovative solution than just banning a particular type of material. So, having said that, though, I think New Jersey is in a unique place to try a lot of stuff. Like it could be kind of an experimental lab for all of these different waste management approaches. And that's something that I've advocated for in my research is like, look, you have this very long legacy of dealing with garbage and doing a pretty good job. Like, you can tell some elected officials find that like embarrassing, like, oh, we're the garbage state. No, I mean, you're just good at it. So lean into it. Like, why not show the rest of the planet, or at least the rest of the country, like what innovative waste management looks like? You have the population, we're generally well-educated, wealthy, so on and so forth. People generally care about the environment in New Jersey. All these factors could make it a kind of a great sandbox for trying different approaches to waste management. And to the state's credit, they have tried to do some stuff with like organic materials like food waste or whatever. It's hard, but those issues you mentioned in particular, the straws and the bags, I feel like they were more smoke than fire, if that metaphor holds up in this situation.
That was fascinating. And now I'll pivot and ask a more strictly like history question.
Okay.
You consulted many interviews while you were researching the book, is that correct? Yep.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I did
Yeah.
about I probably interviewed about 20 different people. Usually they were at least an hour. Yeah, it was very in-depth. It was fun.
So I love oral history. I'm a huge advocate for oral history. I've done hundreds of oral history interviews over the course of my career.
Absolutely.
One question I get sometimes is, well, how do you know you can trust people? Is there really value in doing interviews? Talk to us a little bit about your experience and the value that you perceived to get from your interviews.
Yeah. That's a great question. And first I want to say, like, if you're doing academic research that relies on interviews, familiarize yourself with the conversation on data saturation. There's extensive research on this idea of data saturation, which for qualitative research is a suggestion that like, you know that you can stop interviewing people when people start to say generally the same thing and they haven't like colluded to that effect. So you get to a point, it might be 5 people, it might be 150 people, where you've kind of exhausted all of the perspectives on an issue, and you can sort of stop asking at that point. I don't explicitly talk about data saturation in the book because it didn't really seem like a necessary thing to like, go into detail. If the book doesn't put you to sleep already, talking about data saturation will. So that's why, that got edited out. But that is like kind of a discussion within academic research. How do you know that your interviews are giving you the full suite of perspectives? As far as trust, I think, in this particular instance, the waste and recycling world is very small. Most people know most other people in the waste industry. And I think it's generally, with some level of at least professional respect and courtesy. And I think also that, a lot of the most like salacious stuff, it probably wasn't told to me by someone in the industry, who perpetrated something they did wrong. It came from like records of like state investigations or kind of like a third party that then you could talk about, if that makes sense. Where it's like, all right, well, this person I'm interviewing, clearly they didn't pull the trigger on like a gangland killing around waste and recycling, but like we all read about the court case, we all read the New York Times coverage of it. We can talk about it and kind of point to it as this third thing. People don't really, I think, have any reason to lie in that situation. The The other thing that is really interesting about like the value, you had this part of your question about the value of oral history. I totally get that, and I agree. You get different things than you do out of like official kind of documents. A lot of waste and recycling stuff is written by engineers. God love them. You know, the engineering perspective is a very narrow perspective on a problem as broad as waste and recycling, which goes into economics, our human behavior. It has anthropological dimensions. It's not purely a technical problem. So we can't rely only on engineering types of literature. So asking people like, well, what was the thought process here? Like, were you scared in some of these situations? People told me stories about like getting threats of car bombs, like after they would leave like a hearing that they testified in, like sort of shadowy figures approaching them, saying things like, well, be careful when you're driving home. Like, oh my God, like, like that's wild that happened. It did happen though. And that never makes it into, like the draft of this 1981 state waste management plan. That stuff doesn't get in there. So you have to talk to people to figure out like, well, why did you make this decision? It seems kind of goofy compared to like everything else that was going on. Well, like in this town or in this county, like there was a lot of concern over like, retribution about like this particular landfill or whatever. So we decided to play that a little bit differently. All right, well, that makes a lot more sense now. So I think you get different perspectives on, a given problem when you actually talk to people and collect oral histories and kind of just let the tape recorder run. All of the interviews were very open-ended. I had like maybe 6 or 7 set questions, and beyond that, what do you want to tell me? And that was great. I think that was the right thing to do for this type of project. Some of the motivation for the book was, a little bit in my background as an environmentalist, so like trying to figure out like how much, as someone who is active in the waste industry, how much do you care about the environment? Or like what's your perspective on environmentalism? How did that inform the decisions you made in the waste industry? And like those sorts of things, I think, come out better in like a conversation, like, like you're saying in oral history, more so than like, a survey or like trying to answer questions over email or anything like that. Definitely less scientific, if that's your concern, but I think it's a more accurate picture of the actual issue than a more formal kind of research method.
We're just getting to the salacious parts, and now I have to give it over to the audience because I promised I was going to let them ask questions next. So
Yeah.
I'll put a pin in my questions and open things up to the audience. If you would like to ask a question, you have the ability to unmute yourself and do so, or you can type it in the chat and I would be happy to read it for you. First up, I see Gary making a gesture. Gary, did you have a question?
I do. I was wondering if you could project 100 years from now. What do you think the situation will be in New Jersey with regard to this topic?
Do you want what I would like to see happen or what I think is going to happen?
Well, how about both?
Okay. Well, what I would like to see happen is I think the state could really direct, there's any number of billions of dollars that are spent through like the Economic Development Authority and other sort of entities in the state. You should direct those to the waste industry. There's all sorts of pilot disposal, recycling, chemical recycling projects that happen around the US and Canada and in parts of Western Europe. Why not have them happen here? Bring those companies here and see what happens. Make this the epicenter for innovation in waste and recycling. No, it is not as glamorous as birthing the next, electric car company or the next tech company or whatever. But the waste industry has existed forever, and it is going to continue to exist as long as humans exist. So it's very steady, and innovating in this space is hugely profitable. So why you would pass up this opportunity, I don't know. So, and it's increasingly high tech as well. You can, as I'm sure you all do regularly, pick up trade publications for the recycling industry and flip them open. And every third article is something about how artificial intelligence is improving, sorting or improving, cleaning and resale processing practices within some of these facilities. So it can be extremely high tech, and who knows where those sorts of basic research innovations can lead. The other advantage that I point to is that New Jersey, the port of Newark, the port of New York and New Jersey obviously is a major node in global trade. You have the ability to kind of connect with the rest of the planet around waste and recycling issues, and so you should lean into that. You have excellent research universities. You have a population who, more so than many other states, might be okay with some experimentation as long as their trash gets picked up. Maybe do something different with it and see. So I would like to see, in 100 years from now, that New Jersey has sort of the bleeding edge of recycling processing facilities, including technology that maybe we haven't seen yet. And that we're also, finding ways of connecting recycled materials to the industries that would use them as an input. That's really the other side of that coin. You can collect the stuff and process it forever. If no one's buying it, it doesn't matter. And there's plenty of, you don't have to dig that deep in the waste industry to find stories of, well, we collected recycling for 2 years and a buyer never materialized, so it just sat in a warehouse in North Jersey until we sent it all to a landfill in Ohio. All right, well, cool. That's not really recycling, is it? You call it recycling, but you couldn't find a buyer. So, in 100 years, I hope there's a robust and well-functioning market that connects buyers and sellers for recycled material. I hope that people can find the political will to realize that we have to build more disposal facilities at some point. You're always going to need a landfill. You just are. There's some stuff that you don't want to burn, right? There's something, and the rest of it, maybe you do want to burn. Our facilities are going to reach the end of their life, I think, before we've decided to build new ones. And that's exactly where the state was in the 1970s. We're closing all this stuff. We don't have anywhere to put it. It's crisis time. Well, it's not a crisis at this moment. It could be a crisis 20 years from now or 30 years from now, but really the planning has to start today for those types of things, and educating the public that these facilities are safe, that they can provide all sorts of benefits. They can be very properly regulated with regards to air pollution and water pollution and things like that, to where they're not contributing to these environmental justice issues that incinerators of the past certainly did. So that's what I'd like to see happen. A bunch of new incinerators that are top of the line and tightly regulated, innovations in recycling, and a really robust, functional market. What I think is going to happen, though, right now we're at a place where the system works well enough. There's no crisis. There's not garbage on the streets in the sense that you see in some other countries. Sometimes the waste haulers go on strike and, bags of trash pile up for weeks on end. That hasn't happened in a long time here. And so, in light of other things which maybe demand more attention, waste management works well enough at the moment, so it doesn't get attention. I think we'll continue along that route until there is a crisis. And then probably I think the likely solution will be that the state decides to subsidize, shipping waste elsewhere to be disposed of, rather than invest the time and energy to build something here, which is enormously hard. Don't get me wrong. It will just say, you know what? We tried to deal with our own garbage. It's just too hard. We have these other priorities, like send it to Pennsylvania on a train, or like Ohio or Virginia, or, one of these other places.
Thank you. Just one follow-up. Do you see any innovation that's coming out of major corporations like Waste Management to address these problems? I know that they've switched to they're in the process of switching to trucks that only require one driver with an automated lift for the garbage cans instead of having two guys in the back dumping things, so they cut down their cost of collection when they use that. But do you see any other innovations that you think are going to come from industry rather than from political will?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that it's rare that the big waste haulers and waste disposers themselves are doing the innovation. So for instance, like Waste Management is, and I like them as a company, so I'm just using them because it's an example we've heard of. Like, they're unlikely to build the pilot plant for next generation recycling facilities. Their MO has always been that they buy companies to expand their service territory or to incorporate technologies that they would like to use. So I think it's one of these things where you have a startup that demonstrates, hey, this chemical process works, or this pyrolysis thing works, and it's economical. It looks like it's going to take off, and then you have one of the large companies sort of purchase them and integrate their technology. That seems like the model, and you see that model in all sorts of industries. The waste industry is fairly conservative, not politically, but just, they're not out there necessarily to push R&D. They don't have to. They're going to make money regardless. And so I think it's more conservative in that way. You do see like kind of startups being spun out of like a lot of STEM research, especially chemistry, chemical engineering, things related increasingly to computer science and electrical engineering, about like sorting and kind of optical recognition and all this other stuff. Maybe those things could get additional support and then demonstrate that the technologies work or whatever, and then they get bought up by industry. So I don't think that in any state in the U.S., New Jersey or otherwise, the innovation, the technological innovation is going to come from the public sector. I don't know that that's their job. I don't know it should be their job, but I think they can support those things.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Question from anyone else? Again, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or type it in the chat, and I would be happy to read it for you. I see that John Beekman unmuted.
Yeah. Hi, Jordan. Thanks for this. And I did enjoy
Hi,
our
John.
talk, which will run on Earth Day on the Jersey City Free Public Library's YouTube.
Cool.
But I had a question, and a related question about composting. Composting has, a lot of people have been doing it on their own. And now I am sort of frightened to see that it's becoming a municipal thing in New York City. And I can't imagine what is going to end up in those compost bins in the city. But I'm wondering if you've seen any evidence of that on a municipal level in New Jersey. I know a lot of individual people who do it. And I also wonder about the effect of removing organics from landfills. Like if removing those organic materials sort of slows down the general breakdown process that operates in a landfill. I don't know. I'm not, I'm not a scientist, but maybe you have some insight onto that.
Yeah, composting is really interesting. I mean, composting for sure has an environmental benefit. The problem, with like municipal scale composting or commercial composting is that will people pay for the finished product? And will they want to pay enough to make it worth your while to actually do this thing or even break even? And historically, the answer has been no. Like, the university where I work engages in composting. They end up having to give the stuff away because they don't have enough uses for it on campus. They try to find local farmers to give it to. Okay, well, it's a public university, maybe that's all right. But if you're a commercial company trying to do composting or contract to a town to do composting, that's not going to fly for that long. And so the problem is like, well, how do we get people to pay for this? And then you have the very real challenges of running a commercial composting operation, which is smelly. It can be a nuisance. It can be challenging to site these facilities in the same way that it's challenging to site any other industrial type of facility. And then you have to change public behavior quite a bit, to get enough of the stuff to actually make it, make these commercial facilities operate at the scale they need to operate at. Can you get even an entire neighborhood block for everyone to compost? I don't know. That's really different. You're getting into people's homes, you're getting into their kitchens, and trying to get them to do something that's different. Some people have said, for like the single mother with 3 children who's working multiple jobs, does she have time to sort her compost into the right bin? Is that the most important use of her time? And people opposed to composting have said, no, that, who cares? You know, like this person has other things to do. And so, you know, it ends up where sometimes composting becomes a preserve of the well-to-do. You know, or folks with a garden who have the space for a composter and somewhere to put the finished product when they're done. It's kind of a shame because you can see that it would be a positive environmental impact to not have food waste rotting in a landfill. To your point about the landfills, I don't know that it would necessarily be bad. I mean, you know, a lot of the methane and stuff that's in a landfill kind of breaking down. If you reach a certain size, which some of New Jersey's landfills do, you're actually obligated to collect the methane, and you know, you can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it on to a business, you can burn it for electricity. You know, so mitigating that kind of climate change dimension of landfills has been thought about in federal law. If you pulled all the organic material out, yeah, I guess that problem would go away, but you'd also have a lot less stuff going into the landfill anyway. So maybe that's a trade-off people would be willing to take, because now you're just putting in, you know, textiles or diapers, you know, stuff that you're not going to compost and you're not going to recycle. Maybe that is an okay fate for some of that stuff in a landfill.
Thank you so much for your question, John. Paul, I see that you've unmuted.
Yeah. So very interesting talk. I'm looking forward to reading your book. I have not read it yet. I have all sorts of questions and issues about plastic recycling, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I think that's just a topic that has so many issues associated with it. But many years ago, I had read an article in the Public Historian called "Garbage in the City: A Trash Museum Confronts New Jersey's Image." And it's an interesting story, right? So this whole effort to clean up the Meadowlands, this museum actually confronts the issue of trash.
Yep.
For about 10 years, and then it disappears because it becomes part of an environmental center, which is more about the natural world than it is about the man-made issues that created the trash museum. And it struck me that that also represents part of the problem that you stated earlier in your initial talk about the problem of convincing New Jersey and New Jersey officials to focus on the waste as something that the state should see as an opportunity, right? Because that sort of happened for a little while there, and then it disappeared. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I know that article. Patricia something, I forget her last name, is the author. It's a very interesting story. Everyone should check it out. It's in the publication, as you said, Public Historian. Yeah, the idea of whether or not waste has economic value, that's actually the issue on which most of the kind of court cases that the state has been involved in turns on that question. And so this, you know, when the state was defending itself from lawsuits, it would say that no, waste has no economic value. That's why it's in the garbage can. If you wanted it, you wouldn't have thrown it out. So therefore, by definition, it has no economic value. Okay, I guess I could see that. The counter argument is like, well, I guess that's true if you just have a pile of garbage on your property. But once someone picks it up, then there's a transaction happening. So the value is not necessarily the material itself, but rather the act of transporting it and disposing it that has economic value. And that was sort of where the state kind of met its legal downfall, was on this idea that it's not the material itself that has economic value, but the carting it around, the disposing of it, you know, the transportation and hauling, that, you know, that's where the value is. So that's kind of like a legal splitting hairs that ended up being hugely important in the history of waste management in New Jersey. I agree with your general point that this is material which has some sort of economic value to it. It's just that it's probably not in its current form. So like if I have a 5-gallon bucket of food waste that has zero economic value as rotting banana peels or whatever, once it gets transformed into compost, ostensibly it has some sort of economic value once again. So there's, the in like kind of anthropology studies of the waste industry, the word alchemy gets used a lot, where you're taking this stuff which, on the one hand has zero value, on the other hand has value only when it's transported, and then on a third hand has value when it gets transformed into something else. It's sort of this very unusual category of material that we all interact with every day, but rarely give that level of thought to. So, like, I don't know that it's convincing the everyday person that wastes have value. I think it's finding ways of kind of uncovering the value in material that makes other people want to do something with it. So like, it's not that like, the 5-gallon bucket of rotting banana peels and onion skins and stuff like that, I might still see it as having zero value. But if someone from, the town or from a private company sees that 5-gallon bucket and says, oh, actually, that's a $12 value, I'm going to collect it and go out of my way to do something with it. That's kind of the part that I think is important. It's weird because I don't think we need everyone to care about it. You just need some kind of interested parties to care about the economic value of waste enough where they want to do something with it. So it's a very like unusual category of material that occupies our lives. And that's part of, I think, why I continue to work on garbage stuff for almost 15 years now, is like, God, haven't you written enough about landfills and incinerators at this point? Well, yeah, but there's like something weird going on here that's like speaks to just a fundamental definition of what it means for something to have value. That's really kind of like has captured my attention for a long time.
And your enthusiasm for the subject really comes through. It's funny, Jordan, I had jotted down a question: why should everyone care about waste management? And you just said we don't need everyone to care. We just need some engaged people to care.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's in New Jersey. Something else that's interesting about the state that you all probably know much better than me is that recycling has made its way into K-12 curriculum, and it has since the 90s. So, kids come home, having learned about recycling and why you should want to do it, and here's how you sort the stuff. And initially part of that effort was to get parents and families on board. Like, here comes, Susie comes home from school talking about recycling, like, we should do this at home. Okay, sure. Right now, everyone has heard of recycling. It's hard to imagine that there's very many people in the state that are not familiar with the concept of recycling. So what is always my question. All right, great. We all understand this. You've reached the point of public education where we all know about it, but you need to translate it into something else. And I think that process of translating into something else is now getting other parties to see the economic value and care about it a lot more than we might as individuals living in our homes or businesses or whatever. So, yeah. Yes, and for another question that I get all the time is like, was Oscar the Grouch your favorite Sesame Street character growing up? Yes, in fact he was. So I don't know if that was foreshadowing, many years ago, but yeah,
That
big
is
Oscar fan. Yeah.
Other questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Well, I don't. Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
So this might be a good last question. So I appreciate this talk. New Jersey appears at least better than a lot of other states, innovative, even has some integrity. So why do you think New Jersey's bad reputation continues to persist?
Well, I think some of it is cultural. My book opens with one of the first scenes from the first episode of The Sopranos, where Tony and associates are talking about ostensibly the waste management business. You know, there's no shortage of references in the kind of popular culture to New Jersey being a place where garbage goes to die. You know, and so there's that. So in the popular imagination, I think, you know, well, New Jersey, it's an industrial, you know, wasteland, and there's garbage dumps and whatever. And then there's Bruce Springsteen, you know. But then when you're driving on the turnpike, you don't not see those things. You know, when you're driving in North Jersey, you do see the landfill, you do see the industrial facilities. You drive through the Meadowlands, it does kind of smell weird sometimes. You know, you don't have to look very far in the newspapers that serve the Meadowlands communities. There's frequently stories about landfills and waste and stuff like that. So it is kind of there. I don't know that the state doesn't fully deserve the stereotypes and the reputation. It does a little bit, though. I mean, that was the history, you know, and so, like, for me, I guess it's kind of saying, like, well, you know, you might as well own that. It's a valuable service. You know, you can make it even patriotic. Like, some of the first landfills in the Meadowlands were to serve the Navy, the Army, and other military entities that were using New York Harbor. You know, so like there's even that kind of like military dimension to it. So you might as well own those things. You could do a better job of maybe, you know, making it more attractive when you're driving up and down the turnpike, which unfortunately is the experience that many people have. That's the limit of their experience of New Jersey, is driving through it. And so that may be what you see. You know, how do you communicate all of this on a billboard or at the, you know, Celia Cruz rest stop? I'm not really sure. I guess you could try, but, you know, maybe there's something there, kind of a public history type of project.
Well, Jordan, this has been so interesting. Everyone, we are coming up on an hour, and we told Jordan we would take about an hour of his time. So I think we're going to leave it there. But I encourage all of you to go out and get Jordan's book now, Garbage in the Garden State, Rutgers University Press, 2023. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Michelle, did you need to make any last remarks as president?
I think I'm chair, but president is nice.
Wait, which group am I in? We got presidents, we
Yeah, I
got
know.
chairs in different groups.
Okay, we could change that. No, just a reminder again to please register for our next two events, April 2nd, the business meeting and undergraduate presentations, and our in-person event, May 22nd at Monmouth University. If you're planning on going, please register for that so we can get a rough head count. And Tara has the link in the chat to go directly to our events, and you can register right there.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you again, Jordan. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye.